Well, I guess we'll get started, folks. First, I'm Susan Birch, and I work for Ventura Water as an environmental services assistant. Welcome to the Winter in the Native Plant Garden class. This is the first of our 2022 gardening series, and I'm so happy that Antonio Sanchez is able to instruct us today. He's done several of our courses over the years. He has over 15 years experience in nursery profession, and he is a native plant expert. A couple of housekeeping things. We will be recording the class today, and everyone will get a follow-up email that will include a link to the course in case you want to review it at all or share it. We also will have the PowerPoint and any resources that we mention or Antonio mentions available on that email. If I can ask that everyone keep their microphones muted. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat feature and hopefully we can address them either during the course or at the end of the course. Also, if you can keep your cameras off, that seems to help us with any potential for lagging. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Antonio. Thank you.
Good morning, folks. How's everybody doing? Hopefully everybody's good. This is cool. So I know we had about 30 people registered this morning. And, you know, in typical Ventura fashion, only 5 of you are here. I'm just joking. It's actually just California. So what that means is that I'm here for you guys. I will give you the talk. The talk is going to go very fast if we have this smaller group. And so I would love for it to be interactive if you guys are into it, as far as asking specific questions. The more specific you can get with the question, the more I can help you if that's what you're looking for. I also have a bunch of tips and stuff that we'll cover. So winter is the most important time in the native plant garden. Absolutely 100% the most important time. So what is winter? I have no idea. When is winter? Winter is supposed to be December through like February. What I consider winter, so we kind of lied when we advertise this class. What we really mean is the wet season. Right? And the wet season could be anywhere from November to about March, sometimes April. But for me, for this class, let's consider this a winter or wet season class. So that's November to March. And so that's what I'm going to be focusing on today, is what to do in the garden. It doesn't have to be native, but let's just call it low water, but I'm going to be focusing on native plants. So what to do in the low water or native plant garden in the wet season, right? And the wet season is super, super important to understand that this is the wet season, even though it hasn't rained I know we had a little bit of rain the other day, but it's super important. I'll explain to you guys why in a little bit. But the first thing I want to start off with is maintenance, because maintenance is probably the most important thing for an older garden that we do in winter. So there's always questions about how I maintain, when do I maintain, how much do I maintain, do I fertilize, how do I cut, et cetera, et cetera. So we made a few videos where I work, and I'm lucky enough to work here in the national park, in the Santa Monica Mountains National Recreation Area. I get to run the nursery and the seed collecting programs and some of the public outreach. I'm looking at Susan. Actually, I can't see Susan. Susan, can you see my screen? Yeah. And then Susan is she is on mute. Can you just give me a thumbs up?
I can see your screen.
I'll ask you for a thumbs up just to make sure. So I'm going to go ahead and play this video, and I will get into maintenance more, but I want to show you guys some videos that we made here in the park that are perfect for this time of year. And the first one is, and I just hit the wrong button, see? I told you. So the first one is how to maintain native sages. And if you guys don't have any sages, you might have purple sage, you might have black sage, Cleveland sage, white sage. If you don't have any sages, it's all good, because you might have a lavender, and lavender, we're going to maintain the exact same way. So this is a quick 1-minute video, and all it is a stop motion video showing you how we go from an old plant, quote old, right, in December, January, February. So now, and how we prune it down to maintain it if we don't like the shape of it, if we want to clean it up, or if we want to get into the wood, if we want to reshape it, right? And then I'll get into another video that does sages, but it's a bit more explanation. So you just give me the thumbs down, Susan, if anything goes wrong.
Okay.
I I always feel bad when I see that video, because that poor sage, that poor white sage at the end, we destroyed that thing. But the good thing is that that thing came out beautiful. So I'm gonna get into a bunch of detail, but the thing to know about these sages and lavenders, right? Lavenders aren't native, but they basically act like native sages. They wake up during the winter and spring. They go semi-dormant during the late summer and fall. They get woody after 2 or 3 years. I could be talking about native sages or lavenders. It doesn't really matter. The thing to know is that when we're going to cut that hard on a plant, we need it to be flexible if it's a sage or a lavender. And the time that they're most flexible is now, usually during the rainy season. When there's rain, even sometimes there's no rain, just the plant with the cool weather, a little bit more fog in December. We may have not had any rain, but the plants still know that that's the time to start shooting out their new growth. And so that's the time we can cut them back hard. And a hard cut is 2/3 of the plant. So if you have a 5-foot plant, we took that plant down to about a foot, that sage over there. So this is a little bit more descriptive video of shaping those sages. And I just want you guys to notice the difference between removing flowers, that's called deadheading, and we can do that any time of year, to actually maintaining and pruning the plant, which is going in hard and cutting the plant. And we really want to do that with lavenders and sages when they're flexible. And for us, they're flexible this time of year, right? The rainy season or the wet season.
Be showing you how to maintain native California sages in your garden. I will be demonstrating how to lightly shape and heavily prune white and purple sage here at King Gillette Ranch. As far as lightly shaping, this could be done any time of the year. However, heavy pruning should only be done when the plant breaks dormancy. During summer is when the plant becomes dormant, and during winter is when it breaks dormancy. So when you lightly shape, you're just going to be cutting 1/3 down the stem, and you want to cut right above the node where the leaf and the plant meet, because this extra is dead and it won't grow from there. You also want to be cutting these dead flowers off because these won't grow anymore. Now that I've showed you how to lightly shape, which can be done any time of the year, now I'm going to show you how to heavily prune. Instead of taking 1/3 of the stem off, I'm now going to be taking 2/3 of the stem off when I want to heavily prune. When we heavily prune, one thing to keep in mind, this is opportunity to shape the plant how you want to grow it. So as you can see, this plant is a bit lap-sided. So since we're going to be pruning, I'm going to take this opportunity to shape it more evenly. Keep in mind, we don't want to cut our plants too even because we would like a naturally aesthetic look. So cut them a bit unevenly, some high, some low, to keep it looking natural. At this point, it's a really good time to take a step back and see where we're looking at. This is what we want, and this is where we're at. As you can see, this side's a bit lap-sided, so we're gonna go on that side and trim it down. Here I'll be doing some heavier pruning, making sure I cut at the node. So you'll know you're done with heavily pruning when it looks something like this. It's even, it's all trimmed down, and it's ready for the new growth. Thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned to learn more with heavily pruning when it looks something like.
Okay, so look at what she's left with. That's aggressive. That is a really aggressive prune. That is like my cousin at a singles bar and Payday. That is an aggressive pruning. If we're going to do something that aggressive, you need to know when to do it. But this is some of, I don't want to call them the secrets, but these are some of the tips and the tactics of how we keep our native plant gardens looking sharp, is to know when to prune them properly, and to maintain them correctly. So let me know if you have questions. I'm sorry about that. So that's for sages, and it's the same thing for lavenders. So this time of year, we're getting rain. Plants are waking up from a lot of summer dormancies. If they never went dormant, they're just shooting out a lot of new growth usually. So let me show you another plant. This is more of a softer perennial. So we just looked at sages, which are shrubs, like a lavender, like a rosemary, 3 feet tall to about 6 or 7 feet tall. This would be like a butterfly bush, a non-native buddleia, a rosemary. There's a cistus, which is a rock rose. There's so many plants that are not native that would fit into this category. So I'm going to move to another category, and these are softer plants. These are usually people buy for flowers. So we call these perennials, or flowering perennials, smaller, softer plants, usually cheaper to buy at nurseries, usually available in smaller pots. And so this next video is on California fuchsia, which is probably the most popular native perennial for flowering during the summer and the fall. It's a phenomenal hummingbird plant, but people don't know how to maintain it, right? It grows like crazy during the summer. It flowers beautifully, and then it falls asleep around Thanksgiving time, and people don't know what to do. And so this is a video, just a short 1-minute video on what to do.
Hi, my name is Jamie, and today I'm going to be showing you how to cut and maintain California fuchsia, or Epilopium caneum. First thing to know about your California fuchsia is that cutting back should never be done to plants less than a year old. It also grows by rhizomes, meaning it grows underground. Because of this, we cut back hard in preparation for the fresh spring growth. These are some of the tools we will be using: some hand pruners and shears. Since we're going to be cutting back hard, I'm going to be using the large shears to get rid of all the dead wood. Now I'm going to be using the smaller pruning scissors to be more precise. Here you can see where the new growth has started, and the old growth we're going to be cutting off all the way to the ground. So here you could see the new growth that we left. It is a lot smaller and more manageable than the old growth that we cut off. Thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned to learn more about native plant maintenance for your garden.
Cool. So just a few things on that. That we really only prune after the second year. And that would be like the Nutella Poppy. Someone said they have a Nutella Poppy. This would be very, very similar. The Nutella Poppy acts almost like the California fuchsia, not quite. I realize it's a much bigger plant, but it's basically a plant that spreads underground by rhizome, and sometimes people don't know what to do with them after they flower. So if you have an old established colony of Nutella Poppy or a fuchsia or other rhizominous or plants that grow by rhizomes spread underground, that's what we want to do if you want to clean them up. You wait to see all that new growth emerging. So I'm going to show you guys a picture again of that. I'm going to mute this, and we can see the growth emerging. When we see that during the rainy season, that's when we want to cut. And I love seeing this color. I'm like addicted to this color. That right there. So once you see that, which if you have a Nutella Poppy, you will see it right now. These will be some old stems, and you'll see new growth coming from the ground, separate from the old growth. Hack that to the ground. And when we say to the ground, we mean to the ground. Literally cut it to the ground as if you had a lawnmower, and you'll be rewarded with a much cleaner looking plant. It's kind of up to you how often you want to do this. And I will get into fertilizing in a little bit. But if you do this more than once in a plant's lifetime, you definitely want to consider some fertilizer. And the last one is again for soft plants, and this is dividing. So this is the perfect time of year when plants are waking up from maybe their summer dormancy, or they just have a lot of good fresh growth, and they've made it through a good rainy month like December or January. This is a perfect time to get our plants and start to split them apart, to start to divide them. So this is a short video, just a 1-minute video on how to split up our native plants this time of year.
Hi, my name is Jamie and welcome back to our series on landscaping with your native plants. Today, we will be dividing and replanting some of your perennials. Always make sure to choose plants to divide that are healthy and actively growing. Divide the plants when they are breaking dormancy in winter and spring. Make sure that the plants have been watered a few days before dividing. Today, we will be dividing blue-eyed grass. To dig up the plant, dig it out from multiple angles. Dig down as far as possible. Before we divide the plant, we need to acknowledge that we just uprooted this plant from its home. We also took off some of its roots. We need to make sure there's a good ratio between the plant and the roots, so we're going to give it a little haircut to allow for new growth. We are now ready to divide. If you plan to replant your blue-eyed grass back into the ground, cut the grasses from the bottom into clumps from 2 to 4. From here, you could replant these into pots to divide even further or plant them back into the ground. Stay tuned to learn more about landscaping with your native plants.
Okay. So
dig down as far.
So on this one, it's important that if we're going to divide these plants, that we make sure that they're actively growing. And so that's what Jamie made sure. If they're not actively growing, we want to give them water for a few weeks to make sure that they're fresh and that they're healthy enough to be dividing. And it's up to you how much you want to divide. And it's a little bit up to the plant too. But we can divide it in half. We can divide it in fourths. What we do at a nursery is we get as many plants as we can. So we might take a blue-eyed grass and split it up into like 20 or 30 different parts and put those in small pots. But if all you want to do is freshen up the plant and make one plant into 2 plants, then you can definitely just cut that plant in half, give it a haircut like Jamie showed you. We usually cut about half off the top of a yarrow or a fuchsia or a grass or a blue-eyed grass, and then plant that right back into the ground. So I'm going to stop sharing these guys. And like I said, I will get more into sorry, I'm super bad at transition here. I will get more into maintenance. I just want to make sure that we went over that just to show you guys what that is. And now I don't even know how to push this button. Okay, here we go. And I can't see you anymore. Can you guys see this screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. Right on. So let's talk about native plants. This is going to take just a second. Most of the plants I'm going to talk about today and maintaining are not from redwood forest. They're not from upper alpine meadows. They're not from high deserts like Joshua Tree. Even though a few do occur there, most of what I'm going to talk about today and maintaining today is the local native plants. So that could be stuff from like Baja, San Diego, even the Channel Islands, chaparral, coastal sage scrub, oak woodland type plants. We have so many plants in California, and so many of them are hard to grow locally just because they're not native to our local area, and they're hard to get adapted to our area. Even though it's in the same state, the plants don't really care about the little border that we drew with the state. They actually care more about the local ecology and sometimes soils and fog and things like that. So remember, the plants that we're talking about today, if you guys see, this is what they remember. They remember wet winters and dry summers. And if you take nothing else away from this class, you should be watering your low water gardens 2 to 3 times a month during the dry season. If you're watering more than that, you're probably wasting water and you should just be growing food. Our native plants survive with no water during the summer, and we're giving them 2 to 3 times a month water. It's more than enough, especially in a coastal area like Ventura. Could be a slightly different if we're talking about Riverside or Pasadena, but let's be honest, Ventura is one of the mildest climates in the world. And so what is a local plant? It's very easy to find stuff on a website. If you look at this little picture right here called Calflora, and I won't go too deep into this, but I think it's kind of important, especially if you've killed a few plants before. This might be the reason why you've killed them. So golden yarrow is really easy to grow, and it's a really pretty plant this time of year. It flowers like crazy. It's starting to flower, but it really goes off in March, April, and May. And you can see by the distribution, these blue dots are where this plant is naturally native to. And so these are the natural populations or the occurrences of this plant. It's not all of them, but it gives you an idea of where this plant wants to grow. So we're talking about Fresno, we're talking about San Jose, we're talking about Baja. This guy has gotten around. He knows how to grow in different habitats. So let's look at a very, very close relative. And this would be like comparing human beings. And human beings, our scientific name that we've given ourselves is Homo sapiens. And comparing us to like chimpanzees or monkeys that are also in the genus Homo, but are different species. And so we're closely related, but we're not exactly the same. And so let's look at a closely related plant of Eriophyllum convertiflorum or golden yarrow. And you'll see this is seaside golden yarrow. It looks kind of similar, but look at the distribution. This plant naturally wants to grow by the coast. I've only seen this a few times in native nature. And every time I've seen it, I can either see the ocean at the same time, or I can hear the ocean. So that's how close it grows to the ocean. It's always growing in sand or rock. I've never seen it grow in clay soil. We'll take a plant like this, grow it in clay soil in Ventura, add a drip system or put it next to a lawn, and it looks amazing for 18 months. It looks great for 2 years. And then year 2.5, almost like a relationship, it hits a wall and then bam, it dies overnight. So what happened? This plant, most plants are tough and they can take 1 or 2 years of rough conditions. But this plant realized that it wasn't where it wanted to be, and it probably just drowned with too much wetness in heavy clay soil. Doesn't mean it can't survive in Ventura away from the coast. It just means we can't drown it like we can this other golden yarrow, which I'm not recommending you drown, but this guy's much more adaptable. He's handled a bunch of different soils, a bunch of different temperature highs that we probably wouldn't find on the coast. So let's focus on 5 plants today. I want to focus on what to do with these types of plants in the wintertime. And before I get going, I just want to see if we have any questions that I should address right now. So Susan, is there anything that I should go back and look at, or are we good?
There are no questions in the chat at this time, so we're good.
Perfect. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat and we can address them as we go along or at the end of the workshop. So these are 5 very, very common native plants, and they're very, very common for people to have no idea what to do with them or how to maintain them. So Penstemon margarita bop, island snapdragon, deergrass, Ceanothus Yankee point, and hummingbird sage. And I picked these 5 not only because there's a good chance if you have native plants, you have probably one of them in your garden, but they represent kind of the 5 different areas of native plant maintenance. It's not 100% true. I'm kind of lying right there, but they do represent different plants. So this is a soft perennial. This is a plant that doesn't grow underground like the fuchsia, stays above ground. And so we want to know how to maintain a soft perennial. The next one is a small shrub. So this is like a sage or a lavender or a rosemary. This is evergreen and it flowers almost all year. How do we maintain this plant? What do we do with it? This is deergrass. This is one of our bunch grasses. This guy has a down season or a dormant season, if we want to call it that. It doesn't ever go fully dormant, but it has what we call a downtime. And then folks want to know how to maintain this plant. Then I see a note, this Yankee point. This is a larger shrub, and a lot of folks use this as a ground cover or a small hedge. And so this is a big woody evergreen plant. This can get 8 feet, 10 feet wide. People want to know how to maintain some of our native shrubs. And then hummingbird sage. This grows underground, just like fuchsia, just like some of our yarrows and things like that. And so it's a soft perennial, but it's not like the penstemon I showed you. The penstemon doesn't spread underground. This one does. And so we would treat this differently in the garden. So these are the 5 that I'm going to go over. And I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page as to what these are. And so I'll just explain or describe these plants a little bit. I really like these plants. If you guys have ever seen my talk, you'll hear me talk bad about deergrass because I kind of hate deergrass at the same time, just because so many landscapers, designers, and architects use this plant so often, and it's almost like it's overused and it's not maintained correctly sometimes, but I have like a love-hate relationship with that plant. It's a beautiful plant though. So let's start with the first one and make sure we all understand what the penstemon margarita bop is. So penstemons are native to California and to other states. There's a lot in Colorado. This guy is a small plant. He's about 18 inches tall, 3 feet wide. It's a perfect plant for like a sidewalk planting, or if you have like, as you walk up to your house or your apartment building, there's only about 2 feet wide of area to plant. This is perfect. What we should know about penstemon Margarita Bob is it really wants full sun. These penstemons, for the most part, not all of them, but the penstemons that I'm usually talking about love full sun. And where they occur in native nature is almost never clay soil. And so people assume that they're not going to work in clay soil, but it's completely incorrect. There's a big difference between wet clay soil and dry clay soil. So you can definitely grow stuff in clay soil that says needs perfect drainage or requires good drainage. No problem. We just need to adjust how much water we give it. And so this is one that you'd want to adjust. You wouldn't want to just put a drip system on here in clay soil and water this guy every 2 days. It would be dead pretty quick. This guy's excellent for attracting birds, bees, butterflies, hippies, etc. And it actually makes a really good cut flower too. These flower stems are full of flowers, and they're excellent for cut flower arrangements. And a few other notes about this plant. There's a bunch of other plants that are almost exactly like this that you can substitute. So you could use blue gem penstemon. You could use penstemon heterophyllus or foothill penstemon. There's a lot of penstemons that you could use as a substitute for this plant. I love growing this plant in a small pot and using them in small pots. And you can buy them for about $5 if you're lucky, like at Green Thumb or other spots. Whereas if you buy them in 1 gallons, they're really expensive, and it's hard to cover a lot of space without like burning your budget real quick. Another thing about this guy is this guy really wants to be deadheaded, and deadheaded is all that is just a maintenance technique for keeping plants flowering. So look at all these plants. I'm sorry, look at all these flowers. You can't even see the plant here. All you guys are looking at is flowering stems. And the important thing to realize about a flowering stem is that that's going to leave the plant no matter what. It's basically like a mom getting pregnant, and the pregnancy, right? The child that's inside a mother will eventually leave that mother. And so when we're doing maintenance, these flowers are basically the child. So they get pollinated, they start to create seed, and they eventually will fall off on their own. But what we do in the garden is we usually cut them to maintain them and then to make them look good. And with the penstemon, we can actually make the plant flower longer. And so that's what I'm going to recommend. We can do this 2 or 3 times a year with this penstemon, and they're probably starting to flower right now or about 2 weeks away from flowering. So what do we do with deadheading? Look at this plant. I see no sign of any dry flowers whatsoever, except maybe right here. If you guys can see my cursor, that looks like that might be dry. But overall, this is a sharp, clean, fresh looking plant. Once we see about 50% of the flowering stems start to show these dried flowers, these flowers will dry, they'll fall off, and then the fruits will start to form. We want to cut this plant, just the flower stems, not the plant. We want to cut the flower stems once we see about 50%. If we wait too long, the plant's going to think that it has set seed and it will not respond to the cut. If you cut it, the plant's not going to die, but it won't reflower. So what we need to do is we need to cut the plant before too many of the flowers get pollinated. And so we will actually go in here and individually cut stems every 2 weeks. We'll take out the stems that are starting to dry, and that will leave flower stems and stems that haven't flowered. And if you do that, then you can have a penstemon flowering into the fall. No problem in Ventura. If you don't do this, you'll have a very short window of flowers, usually about 6 weeks, and the plant won't go dormant, but it just won't flower again because the mom thinks I set seed. There's no reason for me to set more seed. The seed are still hanging there. I did my job as far as making the next generation. But if we cut it before the seed has a chance to form, a lot of these perennials will want to respond with more flowers because they need to survive. That's what plants do is they produce seed to survive. So the biggest maintenance tip and the biggest thing to do starting in March with this plant is to deadhead, is to remove the flowering stems, not the plant, the flowering stems as they go dormant. And then once a year, during the winter, when this thing is flexible, so about November to March, is when we cut the plant back, right? The plant is flexible, so we can actually go into the plant and cut it back pretty hard, 1/3 to 2/3. And if we're doing design, this plant looks really good if we use it in groups of 3, groups of 5, groups of 7, etc. So Island Snapdragon, this is a small shrub, so we can compare it to rosemary. We can compare it to some of our sages, things like that. So about 3 feet tall to about 6 feet tall, depending on where you grow it. This is being maintained as a hedge. And I love this plant because it has this naturally arching nature, right? It has this kind of like, it wants to grow like a fountain. And so this plant really does flower almost all year. It's very easy to find at Lowe's or Home Depot. You can also find it at Green Thumb and other, like Nutella Nursery. Hummingbirds love this red flower. It's really nice to grow on a slope because the gravity will kind of, if you can see what it's doing here, it'll actually act almost like a ground cover on a slope. It'll start to spill its way down on the slope, which is really attractive. Looks good in a pot too. It has this vase-like feature in a pot, in a big pot, like a wine barrel. It's very easy to cut into a box hedge if you want to. You can even grow it up against a wall and train it like a small vine, or espaliate it, grow it flat up against a wall. It won't latch onto anything, right? Like a grape or other vines. So you kind of have to train it or tie it down if you really want that look. But it does kind of grow up against a wall if you like it. So the thing to know about this is that this is an evergreen plant like a rosemary. This is an evergreen plant like some of our native sages, even though some of our sages go slightly dormant during the summer. But for this talk, we're going to treat them in the same group. And with these evergreen plants, we can cut them lightly any time of year. And so for this hedge, you can maintain this once a month. You can take some shears, like they look like large scissors, every 2 months if you'd like, and cut them to keep this form, because we're not cutting deep into the plant. We're just basically cutting the loose ends, or like the split ends of a hair. It's not really a haircut when you cut your split ends. So 10%, 20% of these evergreen plants is no problem. July, August, October, it doesn't matter. You can take these plants and shape them. If it's a 5-footer, you want to cut 1 foot off of it, no problem. That's about 20% of the plant. And for these flexible evergreen plants, like these sages, like rosemary, like this snapdragon, just take the shears and go nuts. I mean, don't go deep, but go nuts. But realize that once we cut that, we're going to lose a lot of the flowers. So you'll see, and people have asked me, oh, you know, my hummingbird or my island snapdragon doesn't have a flower. You know, I'm keeping it small. Well, you're pruning it too much. And if you do prune it too aggressively, too often, you won't ever let the flowers set or produce, right? So that's the only thing I would realize with this plant. But if we do want to shape it, because occasionally they do get too big or they kind of get a little open and ratty looking, then we want to plan when we're cut it hard. If we're going to cut 2/3 of the plant, so we're going to cut a majority of the plant, there's really only one good time to do that, and that's during the winter and early spring when the weather is still cool, the soil is still a little wet, and the plant is really, really flexible, right? So I'm trying to drive home to you guys that winter, for the most part, is an excellent time to do a lot of our maintenance on most of our native plants. Deer grass, this is, like I said, this is overused. You can see it in a lot of new housing developments around Ventura. You can see it on the freeway 101 heading into LA. It's everywhere. Very easy to grow. You can grow it in shade or in sun. They use it in Phoenix to give you an idea of how much sun it will take. It needs very, very little water. A few things about this plant. I really like giving this plant room, right? He can get about 5 feet wide, and I like to give them that much room. I think they look a lot better like that. Sometimes the landscapers kind of plant them a little too close together, and they're kind of bunched up. You guys can do whatever you like. So the thing to know about this plant is that it never really goes to sleep all the way. But if you want to just lightly clean it up, the easy way, and you can do this any time of year, this is not a winter thing, is to take a rake, and in the middle of this clump, you just start combing out. And it's all the brown dead grass stems will start to just fall. They'll just rake them right out, right? But that doesn't really clean up the entire plant. It just kind of takes some of the stuff out, some of the rattier looking stuff. If the plant's getting too big, or eventually some people feel they need to cut it back for looks, the best time of year is, guess when? The rainy season, when it's cooler, when the plant naturally wants to wake up anyways. If you guys have never seen this plant in native nature, it's almost always located by creeks, which is kind of weird that it loves low water situations and it's almost always next to water, but it's just a cool plant like that. Excuse me. So if we do want to cut it hard or we feel like we want to shape it, the best time is November to March, the time that we're talking about right now. That's because the days are shorter. The plant's used to waking up right now with the rain, and it will handle this really, really hard cut. So all we do is we cut this to about 6 inches. And I like to cut this hard. I don't like to, I think sometimes landscapers, and it's kind of up to them, but they leave too much of the plant up, 18 inches. And you can just see there's 18-inch kind of dead material, and the new material starts to grow into it, and it kind of looks a little, I don't like how it looks. So just know that you can cut this plant basically to the ground and it will recover. This plant, to give you an idea, is used in basketry, and native folks used to, and some probably still do, cut this, coppice it, or even burn it to the ground to produce all this new erect material and the stems right here for basketry. So don't be afraid to cut this down to 6 inches. This plant can take it. It doesn't mind it. So you note this Yankee point. So this is an evergreen plant, and we can put this in the category of coyote bush, of coffee berry, of toyon, of manzanitas, and a lot of non-native evergreen shrubs too. The thing about these manzanita or these cenotes is that they're very easy to prune. We just want to prune them at the right time of year. So just like that island snapdragon, right? The island snapdragon, we can take 10 or 20% off anytime. It doesn't matter, because all we're doing is basically cutting split ends, right? So start to think about your plants as what part of the plant are you cutting? If all we're taking is 6 inches or 12 inches of this plant, all we're doing, if you guys see my cursor, all we're doing is pruning this, right? To keep this away from the sidewalk. That's such a small amount of the plant. It doesn't matter when we're cutting it. But if we want to shape this into a tree, if we want to cut this back really hard, sometimes part of a cenotes will die. If we want to clean that up and kind of fill that gap in, there's a very specific time of year to cut this, and it's a little bit different than the other stuff. The best time to cut cenotes, and this goes for manzanitas, coffee berries, and a lot of our other evergreen plants, the best time is right after they flower. And so for cenotes, that would be March or April, because our cenotes are just flowering right now. And for our manzanitas, it would be almost the same, usually February or March. And the only caution here, they're very, very easy. The only caution is if you're going to cut that hard, make sure that it's not going to rain anytime soon, because a lot of these big cuts on these big woody plants, they take a while to heal. And we don't necessarily want a lot of rain or a splash coming in there. So cenotes is super easy to maintain. We maintain it late winter to early spring if we need to cut it hard. But if we just need to give it a haircut, 10%, 20%, we can do that any time of year. And the last one, the Hummingbird Stage, which is the one that we should be maintaining the most right now. This is basically like that California Fuchsia. If you guys remember that video that we just saw, the California Fuchsia grows underground. And like Jamie said, after the second year is when we can start cutting it. And I love to cut my Hummingbird Sage hard and to the ground every 2 or 3 years. Because what happens is the plant might get open, right? It might not completely fill in. It wants to spread underground, but there might be spots that are just open, like a bald patch. And sometimes we have these flowering stems that stay up, and they're beautiful when they're in flower, but then we have these woody, dead stems that sometimes people think are unsightly. So 2 ways to maintain this, and one is specifically in the winter. And so we cut it back to the ground when we see the new leaves emerging, just like we did in that fuchsia video. We'll cut it right to the ground. That's usually November, December, January. If you're not trying to do that, or if you have a healthy patch, the other way to maintain it is to keep it flowering. I can easily keep this plant flowering from December to June. That's 6 months of flowers in a low water garden that I'm only watering 3 times a month. no problem. The only way to do that though is to maintain the plant. And so we're going to apply our deadheading, and we start in December, if not in January. And so what we do is, remember, this is the mom. If you guys look at my cursor, this is the mom, this is the plant, these are the kids. This is going to fall off the plant anyways. So as we see these flower heads start to turn brown, if you guys look at my cursor, you can see this flower right here starting to turn brown. And the way that stages work is the bottom whorl is the first one to open up, then this one opens up, then this one. So by the time the top is flowering, usually the bottom is starting to dry out. So once you see whole stems start to be brown, these flowers go from pink to brown, that's when we start to take the whole stem and cut it to the ground. We follow it all the way down until it meets the mom and we cut it. And what that does is it encourages the plant to flower more, because the plant thinks that it didn't produce seed. And remember, one of the plant's goals is to produce seed for the next generation. So if it doesn't get to, a lot of these perennials will shoot right back up and start flowering again. So excellent. You can get this flowering for 6-7 months just by deadheading and by watering 2 to 3 times a month. And you have to start early. If you get too much of this brown out here, right, over 50%, it's usually too late. The plant's not going to die, but if you cut it, the plant's not going to respond with more flowers. It's just going to think, I made seed. Maybe something happened. Maybe a deer, walked by and broke it, but the seed is there. So we need to be aggressive about our deadheading. So it's usually every 2 weeks. Cool. So I'm going to check in to see if we have any questions at this time. You guys can feel free to unmute yourselves.
We don't have anything in the chat at this time, but please, again, feel free to unmute at this time and ask any, or enter something in the chat.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to go over a little bit more about pruning. So this is the Nutella Poppy. Again, winter is when we prune this plant. And so this is, these are some of the old stems. You guys can see this color. This is from the previous year. And then look at this coming from the ground. This is new growth that you really only see November, December, January, February. This is when the plant wants to wake up from the ground and send out new shoots. It's a really smart way for our plants to live. They send this out when there's rain, when there's cool weather. They take advantage of the resources that are around. So for the Nutella Poppy, if after summer, if you don't like how that plant looks, because they are huge, it's the biggest flower that we have in California, you can take those 6-foot stems and you can cut them down to about 3 feet just to make them this little box hedge that is not ugly to look at. Some people think they can be ugly to look at. And so 3 feet makes it much more manageable, easier to look at. It's not horrific for a lot of people, but I don't like to cut them to the ground after they flower during the summer. And why is that? Because I don't want to trigger new growth. I don't want to just send them to the ground, because there's not going to be, it will want to trigger new growth. And that's not when the plant wants to grow in August or September. It wants to grow in December and January. So I can prune them and kind of tame them, if that's the word we want to use. And then during the winter is when we cut them straight to the ground, or leave 6 inches or 12 inches, and then encourage all this new growth. I already showed you guys those videos. So here's an example of us pruning very, very hard our Hummingbird Stage. So let me take you back to what Hummingbird Stage looks like. This is not the same patch, but this is how hard we cut a Hummingbird Stage patch. We're cutting it to the ground. So we're getting rid of what was in here was a bunch of flowering stalks. You can still see one here, this flowering stalk. So we cut everything to the ground. And that promotes growth in the plant. Believe it or not, it promotes the plant to spread sideways, right? And so this is what we do with almost all of our rhizomatous native plants during the winter. And again, the winter being November to March. And so a few of the things that we do in winter, which are super important, is rain. I know it kind of sounds stupid, but we water. We water right now. This is the most important time to water. Our water is not really needed during the summer, because remember, they're local native plants. If you're growing a redwood, you probably need to water during the summer because they're not local. But if you're growing a penstemon that we find in the Santa Monica Mountains in full sun, or if you're growing a white sage that we find in full sun in Simi Valley, what we're giving them during the summer is a bonus. So what we really need is good winter water, right? November through February, November through March. So what I encourage folks to do is twice a month, water deeply. We water deeply from November to March. I know it says February on here, but I'm going to include March. I think as things are getting drier and we have less rain, I'm encouraging people to deeply water a little bit more. So we water deeply twice a month, and I start November 1st. And usually we don't have any rain November 1st, and usually don't have any rain November 15th. And a lot of times we don't have any rain by December 1st. And so what am I doing? I'm trying to let the plants know, almost trick them, that they're having a good rainy season. And it's especially important for young plants, right? Plants are almost like people. It's very hard to get a population of people established if we don't have good resources, right? We'll survive, but I don't think the population would thrive without good resources. Plants are the same way. If you have a young native plant and you watered it well the first year, but then the next 2 years it went through winter drought, that's like a child going through almost like a famine. We need to supply the rain, and it's not a lot of water we need to supply. It's still a low water plant. We need to supply the water in addition to what the rain is. So we want to bring it up to an average rain year, which for Ventura can be about 12 to 15 inches of rain. The other thing that we'll do is we'll fertilize this time of year. And the only fertilizer that I ever recommend for native plants in the ground is not even a fertilizer. It's compost. And I found that compost works really well. And all I did, so I studied sustainable ag. So I went to school, I used to work in farms, and I used to, lay drip tape and pick strawberries and all that. And I love what agriculture does. But sustainable agriculture is really interesting. Sustainable being less water, less fertilizer, less inputs to get food or to get resources out. And so I started to look at, hey, what do lavender farms do, like up in Ojai or out in Riverside? What do olive orchards do? Olives are Mediterranean, they're low water. How can you produce an edible crop by using less water and less food? What about grape vineyards? What about some folks that are dry farming their grapes and trying to reduce the water and trying to reduce the fertilizer they use? And I found some of the best, most sustainable farms out there in California and around the world, but I was looking at California. They do almost the same thing. They prune during the winter. So grapevines are pruned usually February. So this is how hard they cut grapes. If you guys have ever seen how the vineyards cut. But more for us is the lavender. The lavender gets cut in February. It gets cut hard. If you are trying to produce flowers for sale in a lavender farm, you want as robust and as active a growing plant as you can. So they don't want any old wood. They want fresh new wood. So they cut hard to the ground in February. Not to the ground, I'm sorry. They cut 2/3 like we saw in that video in February. And what about olive orchards? I don't know when the olive orchards prune, so I'm not going to speak on when they prune, but I do know about when they fertilize. And they fertilize at the same time as some of these very sustainable grape vineyards and some of these sustainable lavender farms, February, March, and April. And so what they're doing is applying compost. They're applying worm castings or compost. And all compost is leaves, organic material, a little bit of water breaking down, and it happens naturally in nature. And if you've ever walked in a beautiful oak woodland and you've walked where there's nothing but oaks touching each other, there's some beautiful composty soil right there because the leaves have been breaking down with water and other natural things happening, and those leaves break down, and that's some of the richest soil that we have in California. And so what we're trying to do when we make compost is recreate a very nutritious supplement basically for the plants. And all we need to do is put it under our mulch. I usually don't even dig it in or bury it into the ground. I take 2 handfuls, and my hands aren't that big. So I take 2 handfuls and apply 1 on each side of the plant. So let me explain that a little bit more clear. For the sage that we cut down, that white sage, I take 2 handfuls and I apply 1 to the side, usually about 12 inches away from the sage, and 1 to the other side, 12 inches away. And then I lightly water it in. I cover it back up with mulch, or if we don't have any mulch, it's all good. And I do that right after I do that hard pruning. So sometimes I do that pruning in December. Sometimes I do it in January. Sometimes I do it in February. But to me, it's very important that I call it rewarding the plant. We want to reward the native plants that we are pruning that hard, because the only times they ever get pruned that hard in nature is usually through a fire. Deers hardly ever eat these sages or these fuchsias to the ground. They don't do that. They do it with some of our grasses, but not with these plants. And so we're asking a lot if every 2 or 3 years we're pruning our low water plants to the ground. And I know we have great soil Ventura, it's very nutritious. It's got mostly clay loam, but we want to feed directly the soil that our sages are in, that our fuchsias are in, that we're cutting to the ground. So this has worked really well for me. And I would highly recommend that you guys either make your own compost or buy some really good compost from somewhere like Agroman, or worm castings from Green Thumb, and add 2 handfuls during the winter, lightly water it in, and then cover it up. And then slowly that stuff will start to feed the soil. It's really, really nutritious, and it works really well for months of slow release fertilizing. It's not even a fertilizer, slow release, light feeding of the plants. Again, just to emphasize what else we do in the winter is we divide our plants so we can dig them up and then split them up into half or even 4s and then plant those. Sometimes you'll get a new plant. This happens a lot. You'll buy a plant from that nursery and you'll have it in the ground for a year, and then it doesn't do anything after a year, and it looks almost the same as when you planted it. What I like to do the second winter, right? So this time of year for a plant that we planted last year, it's not moving, cut it, stimulate it to grow. So cut it. It depends on what kind of plant it is and how big it is, but you can definitely pinch the edges or even cut kind of hard into the plant. If it's been in the ground for a year and it looks healthy, but it's just not moving, this is a good time to stimulate it to grow. A lot of times our plants have been in pots for a long time and they just kind of freeze, right? They remember the pot and they have a hard time kind of growing. They're kind of slow to grow into the soil. And so the plant has kind of frozen. So after a year, if you don't see any good significant growth, don't be afraid this time of year to cut it, to pinch it, to shape it, to stimulate that growth, just like you would on split ends of hair. Go ahead and just pinch it and send it on its way. And that usually does a really good job of taking that plant or just stimulating it to set out new growth. Right now is a really good time to sow wildflower seed. And I want to give you guys a tip on wildflower seed. If you're going to sow wildflower seed, you want to soak them in warm water overnight. Just like you would if you're making frijoles or beans. If you soak them overnight, they're so much softer and they're so much easier to not to grow, so we could grow them, but they're so much easier to cook. They're softer. Same thing with our wildflower seed. We want to soak them overnight in warm, not hot water, warm water. That'll soften the coat. And then we sow them, and that soaking overnight usually saves you 5 to 10 days in germination time. It speeds it up so much because the seed is already wet, right? So it's an excellent time to sow the wildflower seed. I would just recommend you soak it in warm water overnight. And sometimes this time of year, we have plants that are either just too big, or when you planted them, you didn't realize how shady it was going to be there, or actually how sunny it was going to be there. So this is a perfect time to relocate plants too. I probably wouldn't relocate anything after March, even though Ventura is always hit or miss because it's so mild in Ventura. And I do a lot of talks and talk to a lot of people that are in Simi, Ojai and Pasadena and all that. But if you have a plant that you need to move, the younger the plant, the better. So if it's only 1, 2, or 3 years old, the better. If it's 5 or 10 years old, that could be really hard. But right now is an excellent time to move. And here's a very easy formula for how to move it. It's a 2-week process. So the first week, the first day you realize you want to move something, you give it a ton of water. Water it deeply. Even leave a hose there overnight dripping. Get the water deep into the soil because you're going to kill most of those roots. So get that plant actively growing. Then week 2, right? So 7 days after, this is the only time there's 2 other times. This is the only time I would recommend liquid fertilizing a native plant. And so this is an actual fertilizer, it's not compost. Compost takes too long to feed, and it's too little. If you're going to cut a plant, you're going to sever the roots. It's basically like moving a house, but all you're taking is what's in the kitchen. You're going to leave everything else behind. It's a very intense move when we dig up plants. The best time of year to do it is now. So water week 1, fertilize week 2, and then 14 days after your initial deep watering, that's a perfect time to dig the plant up. Right before you dig, we cut the plant down by a half. So if the plant's about 6 feet tall, we cut it down to about 6 or 3 feet tall. Because what are you going to do with the roots? You're going to remove more than half of those roots. So there's a saying in horticulture, we want even roots to shoots. And it's not always true. But if you think about it, you want to move how much of the top of the plant you're going to move equal with how much of the roots you're going to move, right? So you give it water, you fertilize it, and right before you move it, you cut it by half so that the plant will adjust easily. You know, you're not going to take all 6 feet of the plant because there was tons of roots feeding those 6 feet. Now that you're going to sever a lot of the roots, you want to cut off most of that or a lot of that plant. And then you just treat it like any other plant. You plant it into the ground, throw a little compost if you like to give it a little boost, and give it some deep watering. And usually you have a lot of success. As long as you do it this time of year, you give it a good deep watering under the roots and you fertilize it before you move it. That is usually a very good recipe for success.
Antonio, we have a couple of questions in the chat if you'd like to address them now.
Sure.
Okay. First, Karen asked, I have some neglected lavender that needs to be pruned, but there isn't any leaf growth down the stem.
Okay. So that's a great point. So let's see. I'm going to bring up my video. And could you ask that person, or they can unmute themselves. There's so few people in here. How old is that plant?
Karen, if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask Antonio your question and how old it is.
Karen's asleep. I love it. I knew this was going to be a bad class, but I didn't know it was going to be that bad.
Well, I can ask you the next question if you like.
Yeah, well, I'll answer it just in case she doesn't want to. It's all good.
Okay.
So yeah, if maybe I didn't cover that enough. So let's look at this stem right here. This is a white sage, right? So if you guys look at this stem, let me make this bigger. So this is old wood. If you guys see my cursor, that's old wood right here. See how woody that is? Then you can see some of the new growth right here, but this plant really hasn't started a ton of new growth. It's throwing out new growth, but it hasn't gotten 2 feet long yet. And so whenever, she's correct, whenever we cut into wood during the winter, we need to see that this plant has woken up. And this plant has clearly woken up. There's signs that the old wood is waking up. And so that's what we look for. If you don't see that, there's only 2 things. Well, you can do, I guess, a lot of things. But for me, there's only 2 things to do. You need to wait for it to show signs, or you just take a chance and you may kill the plant by cutting into wood that is not actively growing. So I know it's hard to see here. There's
Antonio.
Yes.
I found I think I unmuted myself. Yes.
Oh, cool. Yes. Yeah.
Should I water the plant now to try to stimulate that growth before I could cut back? It may be in a couple of weeks or so.
Yeah, it's probably going to be longer than that. But here's the good news is that you can cut lavender hard, probably up until about June.
Oh,
but
okay.
I don't recommend it because guess what happens? You lose the flowers. So not good. So I think what's going to happen is, yes, you should. This is one of the times that I hate doing this, but I would definitely water it and water it deep.
Yeah.
So you guys want to think about water as if you guys ever been to like Disneyland or like Knott's Berry Farm or somewhere where like um where you're standing in full sun and they mist, you know, they throw mist on you, that little mist sprayers when you're standing in line. So that is a really good way to water. Think about, that's how we want to water our plants during the summer. Our plants are just standing there. They don't need water. They just need a little spritz. And so that's why during the summer, we usually water half as long as we water during the winter. So it's important that you should water to wake this plant up, or try to wake it up, or try to get new growth, but make sure it's a deep water. Don't do a shallow water. What kind of irrigation system do you have?
Drip.
Okay. How long are you running your drips for?
Half an hour.
How often?
Oh, every other week.
Okay, that's perfect. That's what I would recommend. So I don't think so. Just keep it on that system. I don't think it's watering anymore is really going to do anything, and you could run into trouble with too much water. So I would try, however tall they are, try taking maybe a 10-15% off the top, just pruning, just a little, the tops, and then throw some liquid fertilizer. So I'm going to use this as an example. So say this is how big your lavender is. So cut here, just prune here, like a little circle.
Yeah.
And then throw some liquid fertilizer. You can use organic if you like, and see what that does. And hopefully in a few weeks, you'll start to see some of this. If nothing else, it happens. If you're not on top of these lavenders and these sages, like every 2 or 3 years, they tend to get woody, and sometimes they just don't start growing, and they're just open here. Yeah. And so, green up here. Yeah. And then it's up to you. And I hate to talk about plants like they're expendable, but
start over.
Well, no, I would cut to the ground. I would cut it, down to where you want. Okay. To 2/3, knowing that, there's a 50% chance it's not going to come back.
At all.
Yeah. Yeah. If you cut that heavy, but you may as well cut, because you have a drought tolerant established plant. And if you get it to come back, that's great. If not, I would just start with another plant. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
Thank you. Our second question is from Hema, and she says, for the wildflowers, how often should we water after sowing the soaked seeds?
Yes, that's a great question. So the importance, I'm going to add a few things before I get to the watering. You want to make sure, this is super important, that when you sow them out there, there's good seed to soil contact. A lot of people will just throw the wildflowers out there and just water by hose and kind of spray the seed everywhere. What you want to do is, usually if you've soaked them overnight, they're sticky, they're wet. I'll either mix them up with compost or even mulch, sand I've used. You can even use potting soil if you want, but potting soil dries out a little fast, so it's probably not a good idea. But something that you can mix up and basically have like a bowl, like of tortilla, like of masa, like a flour, right? And you just walk around, instead of spreading seed, you're spreading just sand or compost and the seeds in there. That's much more even distribution, especially when the seed is sticky like that, if you've soaked them overnight. And then you need to compress them, right? So you can step on them. You can use a roller that people use for like DG, for decomposed granite, for packing in DG. You could use a rake. Any way that we get the seed, that's one of probably the biggest mistakes, is that the seed doesn't settle into soil, right? Because if we don't have the seed having really good contact with the soil, it doesn't really matter how much you water, because the seed's still going to be very exposed to the elements, and not enough of it's going to be not really buried, because we don't really want to bury our wildflowers. We don't want to set them too deep, but we just need good contact, right? So make sure you do that. And if you've soaked them overnight, twice a week is more than enough. That's way more than enough. If it's cool, you might only need once a week, but I would start with twice a week, and you should see germination within, depends on what your wildflowers are, but within 5 to 10 days. And then once you see germination, pull back to once a week, but then water more, right? So the idea is we water more often for germination, Once we see germination, we water less often to encourage deeper roots and to, to coincide with the drought tolerance of the plant and all that. So hopefully that answers that question.
Great.
Okay, cool. So I want to get it a little bit into watering, and I'm always hesitant about getting into this, but I just want to make sure that people understand how much to water native plants, because I think it's important. And again, the winter season, I forgot her name, but she is watering exactly what I would recommend during the winter time. And I would cut it back by half during the dry season, right? The winter time is when our plants are used to being wet, and the summertime is when they don't need water. And all we're doing during the summer is encouraging them to just be a little bit more flexible, a little bit more green. So this is a great resource. Can you guys see this this sheet that says Master Gardener, Sonoma County?
Yes, you fixed that dark square we saw for a moment. It looks good.
Nice. Cool. So so this could be a little bit more in depth, but I want to show you how we come upon these numbers. So this is free. You guys can find this. If you want, you can send me an email. I just send all these links to you guys. But I used to work at the Santa Barbara Botanic Garden, maintaining some of the gardens out there, all native plants. And we had drip on some, but we also had pop-up MP rotator type sprinklers for some of them as well. And so I always thought I wanted to know exactly how much water do our plants need. And so we use this formula, and it's a really good formula. It seems like it's complicated, but hopefully I can explain it in a way that makes sense. And maybe you guys don't use it, but at least you understand how we come up with these numbers. And so there's a formula. I'll show you the formula, and I'll just show it to you here. This is a formula. What the hell is this? Jesus, that is complicated. It's not really. So if I can figure it out, you guys can figure it out, because I'm not that with these formulas. I just can't. But there's just a bunch of different numbers that we plug in here, and they all mean something. It's really cool. So this crop coefficient is how much water does your plant need? A white sage or a Dudleya, which is a succulent from the Santa Monica Mountains, those are on the very low end, right? And so when I put those in my formula, I usually use a 1 or 0.1 or 0.2. And all this means is they're using 10 or 20%. So they're using 0.1 or 0.2% of a warm season fescue grass. So we have to have a baseline. If we're going to compare a white sage to something, we want to compare it to something that's easy to grow and something that we know needs a lot of water. And so warm season fescue, we can grow anywhere in California as long as we give it water. And so we know how much water it needs in Fresno. We know how much water it needs in Oxnard, etc. And so once we know that, it's almost like Chile, right? We know how hot an habanero is. And so we can compare a jalapeno to it. How hot is a jalapeno? And if you wanted enough, how you guys hopefully get me. So most of our native plants are in the low range to very low range. And that's cool. So you'll see that number when I show you our formula. And the next one is planting density. How many plants do you have? It's a big difference between having 20 plants in your front yard to 100 plants in your front yard. Some of them might need more water. Some of them might need less, depending on the density. And so that's important. How dense is your planting? The next one that we use is how exposed. Is that at the top of a hill, getting full blasting sun and wind? Or is it on the side of a house that gets shade part of the day and no like wind or no breeze? And so those things come into play. A low exposure factor would be something in pretty full shade with very little wind coming through, and high would be at the top of 2 trees. That would be 2 trees. You guys know 2 trees in Ventura, like that's as exposed as it gets. There's no shade up there. There's all the sun blasted, etc. And so you can see that the crop coefficient is how much water it needs. The density is how many plants do we have? Is it super dense or not? Exposure. Then we just take the square footage of how big our planted area is. And this ETO is really cool. All this is we take this from a map. And if we're in Fresno, there's an ETO, and that just means how much water do we need in July for the warm season fescue, or if we're in Oxnard, it's going to be a different number. If we're in Riverside, there's a good chance that the Riverside and the Fresno number is going to be very, very similar. The Oxnard and Ventura numbers would be kind of similar. And then this is the conversion rate for taking inches to gallons for water. And the last one's irrigation efficiency. How are we delivering our water? Are we using a drip system? Are we using overhead sprinklers? If we use a drip system, almost all the water that we apply to the plant will be received by the plant. If we use a pop-up sprinkler, they're getting really efficient, but they're not as efficient as drip. And so it's usually like a 0.8, drip system's a 0.9, and there's not really any system that delivers 100% of the water to the soil. We're always going to leave some to evaporation. So with that being said, we throw all these numbers in, blah, blah, blah. Let me show you what we did at the Santa Barbara Botanic Garden. You guys can have access to this spreadsheet if you like. It's very easy. If I can do it, you guys can do it. And so I really just care about the warm seasons, because at that time we were getting good rain. And I know if I can calculate the warm season, I can just double it for the dry season. I'm sorry, for the wet season. So let's take the hottest or driest month of the year. That's July. And let's look at what we have here. We have Ceanothus, which is super low water. We have Astragalus, which is worse than low water. It's like it needs no water. We have Arctostaphus manzanita. We have succulents, dahlias. This is as low water as it gets for California. It's really, really low water. And I reflected that. That's a 0.1. So it needs 10% of what a warm season fescue needs. Our ETO, or just how much water in Santa Barbara do we need to keep a warm season fescue? That's 6.5. So that's just found on a table. This was pretty dense. So it was from 0.5 to 1.5, and we kind of did in the middle. We're like, that's like a 1.1 density. It was pretty dense. It was pretty exposed. So it's the top of the hill, full sun most of the day, windy. This is a square footage. This is how to convert. This is just a static number that never changes. This is how to convert gallons to inches or inches to gallons. And then we had a pop-up sprinkler. So you guys see these were jets. These were little micro sprays. We had 17 of them, and they gave out 30 gallons an hour. So if you ran those 17 jets for an hour, we would spend 17 times 30 gallons. That's how many gallons that system gives out. And so we ran the numbers, and it looks like we need 301 gallons in July to keep this plant healthy. Not to keep it alive, because it's going to be alive. These don't need any water. But to keep them healthy, we need 301 gallons. And we wanted to deliver that either once a week, every 10 days, or every 14 days. And here is what we could set our timers for. We could set it for 8 minutes once a week. We could set it for 11 minutes every 10 days. I'm lazy, so I just want to do the 1st and the 15th. And so 17 minutes. That's for our sprays, 17 minutes. And so when I need to set a winter rain, right? And I would highly recommend you guys do it right now. We want to replicate a rain. And so for this system, I would double this. I would run this system for 35 minutes twice a month right now, as long as there's no rain. And once the dry season comes up, which for us is April, I would cut back and twice a month water according to what this is. So 13 minutes, 15 minutes, 17. So you could see where the rounding up comes. I just say 15 minutes because it's really hard to calculate everyone's different systems. And for pop-up sprinklers, so this is considered a drip system, these micros. And for the pop-up sprinklers, you'll see that it comes out to about 30 to 45 minutes is how often we run them during the summer. So 15 minutes of drip during the summer, or 30 to 45 minutes of pop-up sprinklers. And we just double that during the winter. And if you guys can do that, and remember, we're fertilizing, lightly composting our plants that we're cutting hard, and that we're also pruning hard this time of year, some of our plants. If you guys can do that, I'm going to share with you guys some of my favorite winter flowering natives. But those are the basics, right? We want to make up for lack of winter water. If we don't have the winter water, that winter water is way more important than the summer water. We want to cut hard things that we can shape right now. And then we want to reward with a little compost some of the plants that we are shaping super hard. So any questions on that? And I'll show you, 5 to 10 of my favorite winter flowering natives.
We don't have any questions at the moment.
Okay, perfect. So I'm cheating here because this is half native. I guess it's kind of like me. This is Trichostoma. This is a hybrid, so a combo of a Mexican plant and a California native. There's some really good nursery folks who hybridize this plant. So we got the drought tolerance of California. You guys may have seen this like in Ojai and Santa Monica's. The woolly blue curls is such a stunning plant, but it has a reputation of being really hard to grow in the garden. The Mexican native Trichostoma purpussii is much easier to grow, but it needs more water. It flowers during the summer. It gets water during the summer, and it's native Mexico. We combine the two. This guy is extremely drought tolerant, and he flowers, I'm not lying, he flowers almost all year, and he's so much easier to grow. Where I used to work in Claremont, so 115 plus degrees sometimes during the summer, they're using this like crazy in some of their most stunning, some of their most open and used landscapes, and it's just a rock star. It's very, very hard to kill this plant, or it's very hard to find this plant not looking good. So it looks like a rosemary. It's about the size of rosemary, so about 3 to 5 feet tall. Excellent plant. The only bad thing is you have to buy this from just 2 nurseries, either Suncrest Nursery. If you guys go to Green Thumb, I love Green Thumb, by the way. If you guys go to Green Thumb, you can ask them to order Trichostoma Midnight Magic. And that's either from Suncrest Nursery or Moosa Creek. Excellent. Love this plant. It's such a rock star plant, and it's flowering almost all year, which means it's flowering right now. Hummingbirds, bees, excellent plant. The Island Snapdragon is another one. This guy. So I'm going to go out on, it's actually not a limb. I'm going to say, if you guys have these 3 plants, bladderpod, Island Snapdragon, and woolly blue curls, this specific woolly blue curls, they're all kind of the same size. They're all in like the 3 to 5 foot range. I would probably guarantee you, maybe with like a $5 guarantee, I wouldn't want to put too much money. I would guarantee you that you guys would have a flower, something flowering all year round just with these. So these 3 plants are so easy to grow, and they flower so long. Island Snapdragon is flowering right now. I told you guys about it, but it does normally flower over 6 months out of the year and has a really strong late winter flower, late winter being kind of mid-January to about March, even though it flowers way longer than that. Bladderpod, one of my missions in life is to get bladderpod into more gardens. This is a plant that I've seen here. If you guys see my cursor, on the beach, looking, by Point Magoo, not in the salt spray from the ocean, but basically as close as you can get without getting salt spray. And then you can see the exact same plant out past Barstow, near Joshua trees. There's very few plants that grow in those 2 conditions. Excellent plant. You can see it here by creosote bush in the desert, full flower. Everything else is miserable around it. And this plant just laughing in full flower right now, over 6 months worth of flowers, loved by hummingbirds, just an easy to grow plant. It's such a rock star. Yeah, I can't say enough about that plant. This is a native to our deserts, out into Arizona. And this one's cool because you'll see sometimes some plants are like people. If we put a plant, or if we take a plant from the desert and it only gets 3 or 4 feet tall, and it kind of has adapted to how harsh the desert is, and we bring it to the coast and it gets more fog, it gets, easier summers, and it just goes off. It gets twice as big. Some of them get powdery mildew. This one does not get powdery mildew. So this is very, very coastal tolerant. I wouldn't put it like at Pierpont right up against the ocean, but anywhere, like by the mall and the East End all day long. It's such a beautiful plant. And it does flower almost all year here in coastal Southern California. It's beautiful. It's a little bit bigger than the other one, so it can get about 5 or 6 feet tall. Such a soft plant too. It's really interesting that this plant is so soft considering the desert habitats that it comes from. But it's great mixing. Look at this ghostly green, right? This ghosty green with this really kind of pastel orange. That goes really well with this woolly blue curl color right here. It's just a really good mix of small leaf, small shiny leaf, purple blue flower, and then you have the big heart-shaped soft green gray leaves and the orange. They mix really, really well together. Our buckwheats are really good at flowering late, and sometimes you can find them even flowering into winter. I've seen some flowering this morning, not this species, but other species. This is St. Catherine's lace. And this is California buckwheat. This is the one I seen flowering this morning. It is one of those plants. These two specifically are some of those plants that sometimes they kind of have one or two flowers hanging around them almost all year. It's kind of weird. And look how easy this guy is to grow. We know that because he grows almost everywhere in California. And this St. Catherine's lace is only native to the Channel Islands, but look at where it's starting to spread. It's actually becoming a weed in some areas. So we don't recommend planting this on like freeways or in next to wildland areas. So if you live next to like Arroyo Verde, this would not be a good plant to plant there because it probably will escape into that area. And we try to only have, local plants there. But for a home garden, the buckwheats start flowering in summer and they can last into winter. Usually nothing in the spring. This is Verbena Delamina. This guy flowers almost all year too, but heavy winter, spring, and early summer. And it is just a perfect ball. It's just a perfectly mounded ball. This is from Cedros Island in Baja. We do consider it a California native because it has a very similar climate to us, which is super easy to grow, great for pollinators. This is one that I really do like composting during the spring. Even if I never cut it back hard, I'm just always shearing these flowers just to keep them flowering. And so a plant like that, just in my mind, it just gets tired of flowering so much. And so I want to give him something because this thing really can flower almost all year. And then two of the best are the ribes, the golden currant. This is my favorite edible plant from the Santa Monica Mountains. It flowers hard in December and January. You'll still find a little bit of flowers now, but they're starting to turn into fruits, and they're really good edible fruits. So if you want to get your family or yourselves into eating local native food, this is one of the easiest ones to do. UC Davis considers it pretty enough to have on their 100 plants all-star list, and those take clay soil, those take 100-degree weather, those are low water, and so golden currant is on there. Another UC Davis all-star that's also on the list and happens to be in our mountains is the chaparral currant. And this one's flowering right now too. Flowers a little bit later than golden currant, but almost the same time. So a winter flower, and these are big hummingbird plants. There's almost nothing out there for hummingbirds in native nature during the winter, and these are two of our best. And we can see how easy it is to grow or how adaptable it is. It doesn't mind the cold, it doesn't mind the wetness. Excellent plant. Not as good a fruit, more something to add sugar with, just not naturally sweet, but an excellent plant. And I did want to hype up one more thing, if you guys would let me. I am lucky enough, as I said, to work here in the Santa Monica Mountains, and we are hosting in 2 weeks if I can figure out how to work my computer, we're hosting a, can you guys see the screen?
Yes.
Cool. We're hosting our second annual. Last year was super successful. We're hosting our second annual Southern California Monarch and Milkweed Conference. That's March 12th. It's free. It's online. We're going to have amazing speakers. Some local indigenous folks are going to be speaking. We're going to be talking about the new Monarch counts from this previous Thanksgiving and Christmas. We're going to be talking about projects around California, dealing with monarchs and milkweed. And what I'm really excited about is March 19th. We're teaming up with a bunch of our friends to do a day of action. And so we're encouraging people to do something about milkweed, do something about monarchs. If you guys don't know, milkweed is the only plant that monarchs will lay their eggs on. It's the only plant that the monarch caterpillars will eat. So check this out. I'm so happy that we've done this. You go to Ventura. What can I do if I'm in Ventura or March 19th? I want to join the rest of Southern California. You can click here and go to our friends at Ventura Land Trust, and they've organized a day, March 19th. It's not on here. It was on here. I look like an idiot now. It was on here yesterday. Anyways, they've organized a day for it's called Monarch Madness, and it's in one of their preserves in Ventura. You just have to register for it. You'll get free milkweed seed. and you'll help do some restoration. If you don't live in Ventura, you can click here in Newbury Park, Thousand Oaks. We're going to be doing a restoration project in our wetlands. If you guys know anyone who may be interested joining us that day, or if you have fellow gardeners who might be interested in our day of act or just the conference, I would encourage you guys to check it out. And I'm lucky enough to work with amazing young folks. And part of the way we can work with young folks is to get them funded. It's really hard to get funding, to do work, to do this conservation work if you don't have funding. And so we do have a website that we're going to be promoting during the conference to raise more money to hire local youth to help collect milkweed seed and distribute it around Southern California. So I'm open to any questions. If you guys have more like maintenance questions or plant selection questions or whatnot, I'd be happy to answer them. And I do, like I said, get to work at the park. And we have volunteer days every Friday and Saturday. We give out 3 free plants every time you come volunteer for 2 hours. So there's a bunch of folks with us right now who are going to take home bladder pod today or take home golden currant. So if you guys want to try a few out and get them, kind of for free, you guys are welcome to join us. And all you would do is find us on Eventbrite. Every thing we do is on Eventbrite. So you can just look us up on Eventbrite and you'll find all of our events right there.
Someone in our chat requested the links for those 2 events, and we'll get them in there shortly.
Yeah, the easy way to remember it is our conference is Southern California Milkweed, or I'm sorry, Southern California Monarch.org. You guys can see that. That's our website. And then that just takes you straight to that page. And I'm sure I'll be sending you guys a link, and maybe you guys could send it out on Facebook or your social media.
Absolutely. Well, while
yeah, we had over like 1,300 people last year. It was crazy how popular it was, and we're thinking we'll have a lot, even more this year. So.
Wow. Well, while we see if there's any more questions, I just wanted to mention a couple of our programs that Ventura Water has. We have 3 different retrofit programs for outdoors. One of them is replacing old low efficient sprinkler heads with new ones. And we also will convert existing overhead spray nozzles to drip systems. Drip nozzles. And then we have a really cool turf removal program where we will pay for $2 per square foot if you do a landscaping project where you remove turf and instead plant water efficient plants or use permeable ground cover. All those are described and including the applications on our website, venturawater.net. Also, our classes, including this one, are on our Ventura Water YouTube page for everyone. I'm trying to see if we have any questions. I don't see
There's
anything.
A question from was it Gemma? About, can I speak on incorporating natives into a non-native garden in regards to balancing the watering? Yeah, that's a great question. So are you still here? I just want to see what kind of plants you're talking about, because there's a big difference between incorporating them with other low water plants or incorporating them into a heavier water or heavier water use landscape. Much easier to do them with other low water plants. They don't have to be native like you're asking, but low water.
Hema is still in the class.
Oh yeah,
if you'd like to unmute.
Oh, she's typing in it, or he. I'm not sure. Okay. Says heavier water use. So when you're watering, so here's the thing: when you're using a lot of water, what kind of irrigation system do you have? Overhead irrigation or drip?
Thank you for unmuting me. I have both. I have a drip system, and I also have the kind that pop up out of the ground and spray the whole area. Yes, perfect. I have both.
Okay, so here's the 2 things. The pop-up area is much easier to get away with native plants because that water doesn't sink in as deep. If you go to the drip system and you run that too much, you know, it doesn't seem like as much water, but the water is at a specific point. I remember when I worked at the Santa Barbara Botanic Garden, we were losing easy plants and we didn't really know how often our drip system, that's why I did this whole thing. And our drip system, we dug up our drip system and it was going off every 5 days, 15 minutes, they were just running it. And it was clay soil, it was compacted clay soil. And that water was so deep, it was so wet, that area. It just never got a chance because the water was on top, right at a point. Whereas overhead sprinklers, it's harder to get the water in deep to the soil, right? You get more water across, but you don't get it as deep. We turned that water off, and months after that water had been turned off, the soil was still wet. It just never got, clay just never gets a chance to dry out, especially if you just keep piling water on water. So I realized that you have two different systems. I mean, obviously, but it's going to be much easier to keep your natives dry on the pop-up sprinkler than the wet drip system. And I know that kind of sounds weird, but that drip system really is drowning or is keeping that soil super, super wet. So the easy answer is, let me pull up my drip or my presentation again. Yeah. So let's see. Can you guys see that presentation?
No, not yet.
No, not yet.
Oh, it's because I didn't share my screen. Maybe I should share my screen. Cool. So this is, it's a very easy answer, but I want to show you with pictures. Yeah. So here's the answer. If you're going to do natives and you have to overwater, which is fine, you want to do natives that are adaptable. You want to do natives that grow in areas. This has worked for me almost over 90% of the time. You can literally look at where a plant grows, and if it grows in a wide habitat, that usually means that we can overwater it. And so what that means is it can grow with roses, it can grow with next to a lawn. So you'll see this with like coyote bush, you'll see it with coffeeberry, you'll see it with toyon, you'll see it with elderberry. Very wide distribution plants tend to be very easy to grow. Where we run into problems is with these guys. When we see very, ooh, that's beach specific, or ooh, you'll see like if you pull up Cleveland sage, if you can see my cursor, Cleveland sage occurs in the Cleveland National Forest down into Baja. That's traditionally 10 inches of rain, and it's always on a hillside. And so it's a very specific habitat that's hard to replicate for some people. So if you have specific questions, I can help you out, but it's basically the coyote bush ground covers, the Penstemon heterophyllus, seaside daisies, a lot of the more common plants that we use, deer grass, hummingbird sage, they have wider distributions and they're from wider, not zones, but they're just used to a little bit more water and different heavier soils than some of these very site-specific native plants. So that's the quick answer, is if you can do that, you know, if you can select plants that are kind of naturally used to those conditions or they don't mind them, then you'll be good. And if it's a drip, then if you have control with the drip, you can usually just aim the drip away. And if you have a spaghetti, you can move the water away. And it's amazing how our native plants love being close to water, but they don't like being in water, if you can imagine that. So some of the prettiest manzanitas I have ever seen, and manzanita is really hard to grow if you're going to give it summer water, but some of the prettiest manzanitas I've ever seen were about 10 feet away from a lawn. And so their surface roots were able to tap into the water, but they weren't in the water. So if you can make your drip system water the area and not your native plant, you might have some of the most spectacular native plants in the neighborhood, just because they're around water, but they're not in water. So hopefully that helps.
Yes,
And
it
then-
did. Thank you.
Antonio, we also have a couple questions from Bruce, if you can see in the chat. And Bruce, I'm going to unmute you in case you want to ask anything besides what you've written down or have any comment on what you what
And get-
Antonio said.
Yeah, and Gemma, I don't think that was kind of a quick answer, but if you want to send me an email, I could give you like a list of like just 20 real quick plants, like the ones I would recommend for, wetter areas. How do I get out of this? Oh, I'm sharing my screen. That's why.
I'll definitely do that. And I like your suggestion of using the native plants close to the garden that I'm watering. Actually, that's going to work very well in my scenario. So yes, I'd love some suggestions. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. And then Bruce is asking, he has mulch in his backyard. Can I scatter wildflower seeds? For sure, you can scatter wildflower seeds. Ideally, you'd water them in, hand water. For sure, you can do hand watering. Hopefully, you're gonna water. But yeah, you can hand water them easily.
Yeah, I have a backyard that they decided to xeriscape it basically by just cutting off the water system. And
Okay. Yeah,
so
that's one way.
Letting things grow. So most of it was like rock hard. So I put some walk-on mulch across the backyard just to let things grow a little bit, and maybe try and reclaim the water system. But I'm just wondering if it's a way of, having native plants grow without much, just basically with hand watering.
Yes,
which I don't mind
yes.
doing.
Yeah, 100%. In some of my advanced maintenance classes, and when we do have advanced maintenance classes, you can find them. They're free and they're online. You can find them on that Eventbrite website. But what I don't want to get too long because I know we're already going over time. But so this is what we use. This is what a lot of nurseries use, and a lot of home gardeners use something like this. But I would recommend, if you could afford it, spending the money on this dram. We call it Redhead. You just put it at the end of a hose, and it replicates, it has 1,000 holes, and it replicates a light shower. And so it's because what people do sometimes with seed is they apply too much pressure when hand watering, and they wash the seed away. And so you want to make sure you don't add too much water at one time. So where you kind of float your seed and you wash it away, you just want to lightly just kind of broadcast and just kind of water over and over. And the other thing is that, we'll do this during our hands-on classes. We'll take a bucket, 5-gallon paint bucket, fill it up with water. We'll time it. And then that gives us how many gallons a minute is coming out of that hose. And so if we know how many gallons a minute is coming out that hose, we can transfer that to how many gallons an hour. And then we can usually make a very, very close adjustment. I'll go back to this just so typically it's 15 gallons a minute we can get out of a hose at a garden. So 15 gallons. And if we go back to our chart, I need to deliver 300 gallons, right? This little, can you guys see my chart?
Yeah, I do.
So I need to deliver 300 gallons in a month, the hottest month. So I'm going to do that 3 times. I'm going to deliver 100 gallons, right? Every 10 days. So 100 gallons. And I know I can get 15 gallons a minute. That's about 6 minutes of hand watering, maybe 7. And so that's how we get, and that's how we calculate it. And so we try to do twice as much of that during the winter because we're trying to get deeper. But that might give you, you might want to, well, no, you don't have this. If you want this chart, you can just email me. I can send it to you. But I mean, you could see the square footage here though, if you want. Square footage is 450 square feet. So for 450 square feet, you would water about 5 to 10 minutes every 10 days. That's what it comes to.
That's helpful. Yeah, because I'd rather, I'm not sure, I might need to get someone out here and resurrect my sprinkler pipes to get them around the yard. Because they had all these zones and so forth. It's a fairly complicated system, but they just kind of cut it off. So it's kind of hard to figure out what's going on under the ground. But anyway, so okay, no, very helpful. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Right on, of course.
Oh, and just a sec. With the mulch, then I could scatter wildflower seeds among the walk-on mulch and water that.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. It'll just be replicating what happens in native nature. Is most of the seed just finds a home after a while. Finds like a little crevice, And some of it will find a crevice where it stay wet. Some of it will find a crevice where it stays dry and it won't germinate this year.
Mhm.
But yeah, some of that seed is out there in nature for 20, 30, 40 years and they just don't wake up. So
Where's a good
yeah,
place
you're
to
fine.
get wildflower seed around here?
Oh, that's a rough one. There's no good answer, but probably the only answer is probably Theodore Payne online.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because some of the other folks like Green Thumb, I'm not sure, but sometimes they'll sell wildflower mixes that aren't really Southern California specific. They have a bunch of other non-local or even non-native plants that are in the wildflower mixes. So Theodore Payne just sells native plants.
Oh, okay. Good to know. Thank you.
Well, Antonia, I don't see any other questions in the chat room at this point, so I just want to
Stephen here.
point out. I'm sorry?
Oh, Steven's here. I just want to make a comment really quick.
Oh,
I just want to thank Antonio for coming. You know, I've been a professional in this world for 10 years, and every time Antonio comes to present, I learn something new. His knowledge is definitely unmatched. And I would say usually he has a following that joins us, and we have a much larger group. But, you know, this time I think it was good to have a kind of smaller, intimate group, and you know, we got to ask all the questions. So thank you so much, Antonio. That's it for me.
Yeah, of course. Whenever you guys start doing more hands-on stuff in person, I would love to, you know, to do an in-person maintenance class, you know, a propagation class or whatever you guys want. It's the more we can get folks involved, the better. So please check out the Ventura Land Trust for that March 19th. It should be a lot of fun. You guys get some wildflower or some milkweed seed free from us.
thank you. I will myself. And gosh, what I really learned is that spring is for indoor cleaning and winter is for outdoor cleaning. Can't wait to go chop up some stuff.
80% of our work in the landscape is done in the winter.
Wow. Thank you for all you participants for joining us today. And of course, thank you so much, Antonio, for you spreading your knowledge to us. All of our other classes can be registered for on our Eventbrite page. We have one coming up on April 9th. That is our drought tolerant gardening class that will be presented by one of Ventura County Master Gardeners. But unless anyone has anything else, thank you again. Look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you guys. Thank you, Suzanne. See you later, Stephen.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Antonio.
Yeah, of course.